And first, I want to echo the comments of the ranking member Napolitano and many of the panelists also, and I want to thank the panelists for being here, about how important the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to water agencies, especially water agencies in California and across. And I think that we, as my own 2 cents, that we should be moving legislation like H.R. 2510 to reauthorize the VITAL program and provide direct investments in wastewater infrastructure. But I want to follow up on some things that the panelists said for my own understanding about what are the benefits and maybe some of the problems. And Mr. Peterson, I'm going to start with you. You advocated in your testimony an amendment to the Clean Water Act to allow for the 10-year permits under the NPDES, I think it was, and you talked about how, some of the rationale why Aqua would like to have it. I'd like to hear a little bit more, but I want to also hear, are there any downsides? I mean, you've promoted the upside of why it would be better for investments and other, but are there any issues involved that we should be addressing if we go from 5 years to 10 years in those permits? Are there problems that are there unintended consequences?
We've looked at that issue. We don't believe that there are, and
okay.
We have not heard those, and we're open to listening. But we think really there's 3 key benefits of doing this. One is the longer 10-year terms promote, we think, a more efficient regulatory process while recognizing and preserving the water quality protections under the Clean Water Act, which is important. We also believe that it encourages longer-term planning and thinking, which is something we all need to do now, and every panelist has spoken about that. And then third, it better aligns the investments that we're making in the 21st century in infrastructure with the timeframes that are needed. And so we think it accomplishes those 3 things and actually helps to make the process more efficient.
I'm going to follow up on that to Mr. Levine on that. NRDC has used the NPDES permit system to urge enforcement of the Clean Water Act to guard against contamination. Talking about that, how would a longer time frame affect enforcement and contamination safeguards? Because we have to balance these kinds of issues.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are some serious downsides, and we very much oppose changing that 5-year term of permits, which has always been a core part of the Act, and you can look back to the legislative history of when the Act was first passed, was highlighted by the sponsors, by floor statements, as really a key thing. And the reason for that is that standards and technologies and water quality needs do in fact change over timeframes much shorter than 10 years. The entire scheme of the NPDES permitting program, not only for wastewater treatment plants, but for all dischargers, was to recognize and to have EPA focusing on improvements in technology and ensuring that the best pollution control measures are used and that we don't have a 10-year gap between when a permit's written and catching up to the next best technology. And similarly, our knowledge of water quality impairments of our water bodies changes over a period of 10 years, and the plans that we develop to clean up those water bodies changes over a period of 10 years. So, for example, the development of total maximum daily loads under Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. Those are basically pollution diets that identify how much reduction is needed from different pollution sources to a water body, right? And those plans have consequences for permitting. They require permits to then meet those pollution diets, those pollution load reductions. And if those permit cycles get extended to 10 years, we're going to see substantial delay in making those water quality improvements we needed. And I'll add, if I can, just 2 quick related points. It's been suggested that by allowing for reopeners of permits, that would solve this problem. We don't think that really solves the problem. If the default is you've got 10 years in a permit, and there's no action-forcing mechanism to revisit that permit for 10 years, you're cutting out the public and you're cutting out EPA and undermining EPA's authority. Right, so whenever there is a permit renewal, the public has the opportunity to come in and seek further protections, which they do not have. Public cannot do a reopener. right? The state permitting authority has the sole power to do a reopener. Similarly, EPA can't come in the way that they exercise their oversight responsibilities. When a state has a draft permit, EPA has a role and a responsibility to review it, see if it complies with the act, and the authority to object and ensure the state strengthens it. So if you put these things off for 10 years, you're taking those key safeguards, checks and balances out of the process.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal. Mr. Weber, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Cooper, I want to visit with you for a second. I was on city council for 6 years in the little town of Pearland back then, which had like 20